And good morning, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA. Only we had to move it over here to McDuff underscore 2020. But remember the task. We're still on task at McDuff channel to smash the CIA, at least to splinter it into 1,000 or more pieces. But to help us do that, we call upon our great friend and investigative journalist, George Webb. So let me fix my audio here and get George up on the screen from Skype, and we can get the show started. There you are. Hey, George.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
We're all doing good. I'm going to add a little bit of volume to your audio, and hey, thanks Norman Smith for a super chat, and good to see everybody this morning. Corky, Jack, Kathy, Dr. B, and everyone else who's here. Gary, fantastic. Well, yeah, and happy anniversary again to Corky. 40th anniversary. That's quite a milestone. Very nice. All right, George Webb. Looks like you're still there, down there, trying to drain that swamp. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I found out the difference between a swamp and a marsh is a swamp has trees. So I guess Washington, D.C. used to have trees, whereas this area, I guess, didn't. But anyway, there's swamps right next door, so it serves its purpose. But I just feel very comfortable here when I walk around these marshland lands and the swamps. I think of Bob Mueller in the Phoenix program. I think of Bill Barr going down to Tegucigalpa in the plane flown by Chip Tatum to make sure that Bill Clinton doesn't shrink the laundry. It just makes me think of all those swamp creatures that are still in power today, John. One guy doing the takedown of Trump with the Mueller report, the other guy looking the other way again, like you did at Iran-Contra for these election machinations.
Well, George, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm happy to see you smiling this morning. I felt like you were down the last time we talked, and maybe that's just me. Maybe I was down too, but I've got renewed energy this morning. I feel like we can still win this. Am I right? You feeling better this morning than you were yesterday or the day before when we talked?
Well, John, we've always kind of had the short sword and the long sword in our series. We've always been working on the everything since Kennedy, and trying to get to the tap root of the corruption. So we can always go to work on that if we lose a short-term battle, which I deal in when there's news and so forth. And so I'm talking to a lot of people in special forces down here, people in federal law enforcement, and if we lose the Supreme Court thing like we did yesterday, where it didn't even really appear like they gave Trump a hearing, we have to look to the next thing. So maybe the reason why you saw me a little bit depressed was that I heard Sidney Powell. I wish I could have been McDuff. I wish I could have taken her out of the chair and put you in that chair and had you move that thing forward. And it was very frustrating knowing that she was doing what she was doing, talking about Venezuela and all this stuff, which was a kind of a diversion or a distraction, or at worst, just not relevant. But that's okay. That's history now. We got to move on to the next battle.
Well, I guess it's a little early in the show for me to toss in my 2 cents, but with your permission, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. Sure. No, but I want you to bounce off of this, so let me just lay it out here like this. For at least 6 months, Trump's been saying we've got everything. We know it all, and that means that he has control of the NSA. Does he really have control of the NSA? Well, it sounds like he does. He's still extremely confident. So what I think's going on is he's just putting a squeeze on everybody that's the next person in line, so that you've gone to the Supreme Court once. You found, okay, we know we know the status of the Supreme Court. That is, they're going to strictly interpret every law that they can to keep Trump from overcoming this fraud. It looks that way to me. course, he's known that it's been an uphill battle all along. So when you look at the lack of activity on the part of the Attorney General, I can't help but think that this is Trump, that he keeps saying, guys, you got to do it. You got to be nice. You got to play nice. Now, if I give you a chance to flip, and I'm not talking to the justices, I'm talking to people in the judicial system, in the Department of Justice specifically, but other people that could be potential whistleblowers about what you just said, and that is that Bill Barr has been deep state since day one. Well, that, George, you also mentioned the biggest problem, and that is the dope dealing. And I think we can threaten people with pictures of them with 15-year-old girls. The American people don't pick up on that. But at some point, all of those things are going to be focused on whoever the next domino in line is. And, Trump's still got time to flip people. If they don't want to flip, then he's also putting out there, hey, we're not going to let the Democrats, pack the court with 24 liberal justices. We will not ever let that happen. When he says that, he's saying that he's going to pull out all the stops, no matter what, to make sure that he gets his reelection is confirmed by the courts and the people that work in the Justice Department. So my theory is that every tactic that he plays is simply focused at some of the dominoes that he needs to knock down, and he's knocked down quite a few of them. A lot of them with your help, by the way. It's like Mr. Buttigieg comes to mind right away. But as these dominoes fall, all he needs to do is to get to the point where he's reelected. Then he doesn't have the pressure on him anymore to reveal all of those things that are in the NSA files that we suspect would basically, anybody in Congress would be vulnerable at this point if they've really got everything. So I'm thinking he's still playing a very, very tight game of 5D chess and taking down one individual at a time until he gets to his magic number and wins this. That's my hope. What do you think?
Well, I certainly have a lot of hopes. I need to see, things that are legal. The people that are rabble rousing for some kind of, martial law and so forth. I think it's the wrong way to go. You don't want to be the second guy since Lincoln to invoke habeas corpus and all that other stuff, especially in this situation where you lose an election. Lincoln did it to try to keep Washington from being surrounded by Maryland, right? So, by opposing states. So Lincoln had at least the preservation of the Capitol as an excuse. Trump doesn't have that. He's just got the preservation of Donald Trump as an excuse. So the only options left, I agree with you, are military options, with the Supreme Court going southward. One last option, though, is, John, the foreign interference. What I saw in the Texas case, and also to a certain degree, Sidney Powell's case, but Sidney Powell went further in the foreign interference. She just didn't lay out the case, but foreign interference is kind of a middle ground between military action and the Texas case that failed. It's what we need is what we need is a McDuff. We need McDuff instead of Sidney to really lay it out. Now, we have the data. We have the network. We know it's the BlackBerries. We know the company is called the Enterprise. We know Barr has been in a part of the Enterprise, this 800 people that got fired by Carter. We know he's been in since 1980. So we're in the enviable position of knowing where the bones are buried, right? But what we need is an entree. We need a vehicle So I've actually done this once before with Len Bracken and one of his uh, experts from, I can't remember where she's from, but anyway, a Georgetown lawyer as well. And we actually did a writ of certiorari for the Supreme Court um, um, to prosecute foreign interference by Imran Awan at on Capitol Hill. So, we're running out of time. Uh, you know, but I would say a writ of certiorari which is a case to be made to the Supreme Court based on some of the individual states in unison. Basically, I would take the same Texas case and take out we got robbed. The refs made a bad phone call to no, the refs got paid. The refs got bribed, right? That's a very different situation. You remember the NBA refs that had the bribery scandal. I mean, he was criminally charged and everything. So that making a bad call by a referee is, the way it goes. And they don't want to, I don't think the Supreme Court wants to indict all those volunteers out there at all the different county boards of election who are just trying to do their job. Someone had a black hand far deeper printing these ballots, etc. And it was foreign influence. And the county workers are just feeding them through the machine. If they get a code back that says rescan, and then they scan them again, and they scan them 12 times, and they scan these groups of 50, the election workers think they're doing the right thing. They don't realize they're loading up the Dominion machines. So we have to look at the black hand here, and I think another suit that really goes to the foreign interference is the way to go. I don't know if Trump has that plan, but I know Bill Barr is not going to be the one bringing it. The guy who looked the other way in about every enterprise operation that's happened since Jimmy Carter.
Well, I had a thought in my mind, and then you said something about Bill Binney, which I really wanted to get back. I don't want to lose that. Say that about Binney again, please.
It wasn't Binney. I was talking about Bill Barr. Bill Barr has looked the other way on all these enterprise operations. Only 800 guys. You add the 300 Russians and Eastern European, and only 1,100 people. Frank Juster Partners, we've been talking, 1,100 guys. So, but the part is the encryption, to get through the encryption and then get through the compartmentalization of the operations. So, but we've done a lot of work. We know exactly who the people are that are involved. We've known them for 30 years or 40 years now. So, we really do need is foreign interference piece. We can't really say, that's why I did a piece yesterday saying foreign interference is it domestic and because if you have domestic and foreign interference, you have a conspiracy to use outside intelligence agencies. And that is, when the people see that, it's all bets are off. All bets are off. And that's what we had. And we have people saying this is a conspiracy theory, like MSM and CNN, saying foreign interference is a conspiracy theory. But we just got done listening to 4 years of them saying that Donald Trump used the Russians to win the election. They're still saying it. Donnie O'Sullivan and CNN still saying that. So we can say it for 4 years, but if you say it, it's conspiracy theory. That's the CNN line this morning.
Well, let's be as specific as we can. You say you need to prove there was foreign interference. Well, what foreign nations have interfered, George?
Yeah, Serbia, Otpor, William Engdahl's talked a lot about it, Otpor canvas. You may remember the last election where we had 2016. It was a Microsoft Professional Services Europe was the front organization. Yershov was the guy and the foundation. He worked with Warren Flood internally. If you remember, there was a Romanian hacker that kind of came out of nowhere, which was Guccifer 2. If you look at it, it's just literally you drive for a picnic and you're in Romania from the headquarters in Belgrade where Otpor is. It was almost fell off the page in terms of how obvious it was. This was the same thing. 2020 is the same thing. We got Warren Flood. We've got his organizations, Bright Blue in Atlanta, Bright Blue in Nevada. His wife is also Alice McAlexander, is also in election operations with her company called Civis, CIVIS. We have him in the Ferrari at 3:45 a.m. We can certainly ask the question with all these. We have IP addresses now. IP addresses, pinpoint accuracy as far as where these packets are coming from. So we had a guy testify in Atlanta, a colonel in the special forces, saying that he had packets. He had packets on the night of election eve. So if election workers were told to hook up the machine to a network to feed the results, there was these modems that were being used to upload the results. We now know that there are Chinese chips in the Dominion machines, Chinese chips in the modems. Those are hackable. We had our election expert, Cliff, I can't remember his last name, but anyway, he described how all these things worked. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Do I have everything? Do I have a film of the guy tapping out the keys, in, wherever it was? No. But we have a damn good idea of where the attack came from.
Okay, I'm just trying to help us be as precise as we can, because when we say foreign interference, I think we're implying a foreign government interference, and does it? Yeah. I mean, does it necessarily have to be a Serbian government official there tapping on the keyboard? No, but you have to tie Serbia somehow into the operation. If Otpor is being run by people who are not connected to the Serbian government, that would be a concern to me to try to pursue that. So the people that are running Otpor, if they are in Serbia, I think you need a little bit more to say this is a Serbian operation, and maybe that might just be me being cautious, but I think that's where I would have my questions.
I'm not saying it's a government-run operation.
Okay.
This is Engdahl saying it's been there. They've flipped 168 elections in the last since they were formed in I believe around that frame. So they've done 168 different elections. 40. He's written about 40 of them. About 40 of the color revolutions they've done foreign interference. Gene Sharp is the person who wrote their manual. For Canvas, the nonviolent group, 198 different nonviolent actions to flip elections. So, but we've gone way past that. We've got down to the 61 or 51 programmers. Lazarevic is the guy. Lazarevic is the programmer who wrote the SMOTE software, SMOTE, the vote leveling software that can be. You can set a computer system up so that if you vote and Trump gets a vote, you can say, well, there's a certain percentage of minority representation that we can assign because the people weren't as educated or they weren't as familiar with the voting. And I can give up to a whole vote for Biden for every Trump vote. Now, in this case, it looks like the percentage was about 0.28. Every time Trump got a vote, Biden got a 0.28. But SMOTE will allow you to, it's a statistical minority oversampling is what it's called, but it's a fancy way of saying if a white guy gets a vote, well, there's probably a disadvantaged black person who needs to have that made up, that differential made up. And they use it a lot for census and so forth. They look at the white turnout in the mainly white neighborhoods, about 80%. They look at the black turnout at 15% downtown Detroit, and then SMOTE allows to do this oversampling, the leveling. So yeah, we've got his name. We know he worked with Strzok at the University of Minnesota, in elections. So I mean, there's a lot of smoking guns here to Peter Strzok.
Connie Bevan is with us this morning. Good morning, Connie, and thanks for pointing out this that I of course didn't know. The Serbian president, Alexander Vucic, I guess, is a U.S. NATO puppet, and the people in Serbia want him out. So there, I mean, if you have a connection between this president of the country and NATO, and if NATO then is, I believe, involved in this Otpor thing, then, I mean, these things can be proven. It's just that you have to have the willingness to go after them, and our Attorney General does not have it. He's simply not functioning on behalf of the American people. May I go further and say this? You know, my father's mission, as I understand it now in life, I'm this is my working theory, and I do believe that TDY, the mission, is tells it to us, that he was dedicating his life to preventing the importation of narcotics and dangerous drugs into the United States, which is just a terrible poison that has been applied to our kids, our people, ever since World War II, but more intensely under in the 60s, after Kennedy was killed. That's when they really start going to town with that. So it is my opinion that my father was correct in that there is no justification. There's no national security justification for the importation of narcotics into the United States. Therefore, those officers that participated in that were violating their oath. And those officers of the government right now, such as William Barr, that look the other way, are violating their oath. And so where this goes with me is that, as you know, I very strongly believe that the assassination of Kennedy was a coup, and that we've been under this new government since then without knowing it. It's a shadow government that we don't see. They put out the color of law elections and whatnot so that we can have this fuzzy feeling that we're living in a democracy. But that whole scheme behind the scenes is all about the dope. It's all about making money, easy, cheap, you know, hardly have to do any work at all. You just need the transportation system. And that has been the CIA's mission, has been to profit from this dope trade that they've got ginned up in the Golden Triangle and in the 50s and 60s. So if President Trump wants to restore our country to its republic status with free and fair elections, I think the best way to do it, in a way that the American people would definitely latch on to, would be to reveal the real true history of the dope trading that the CIA has been engaged in for decades, and to root out the people such as William Barr that have enabled it, as you and I have both studied. And I think case is closed. You know, if we can establish that there has been a dope running operation going on in the United States through government officials that we pay, I think the American people will rise up. And because of that, it's my opinion that President Trump may well be justified, if nothing else if everything else fails, in calling on a military solution, because our country has been hijacked. And if we can't turn it around without violence, without using the military, then when will they ever have another chance? If Joe Biden is seated, you know, and even if he's knocked out within the first week, then you're going to have to deal with Kamala Harris and whoever comes after them. They are on the side of the dark side. They are the deep state. They are the dope dealers. And if we can call them out and show it to the American people that this has been the tragedy of our lifetimes, then I think that, you know, that might be worth it to say, hey, we have got to reset. This word reset is in my mind a lot lately, from the Great Reset by our good friend over there, Klaus Schwab in Vienna. Well, I think we need to reset America to its constitution. Reset America. Get rid of the dope dealers in our government. Close down the opium dome and make it the people's house again. That's my father's mission, and I think that's at least one solid option that we have, is to start putting political pressure on people to reveal what everybody knows by now. I mean, everybody knows about Barry Seal. Everybody knows about the Golden Triangle. Everybody knows about Air America. Well, it's all just whispered in the hallways, though. It's not been put on MTV. It's not been put on PBS. It's not been spelled out, and that's why. And the reason is because the people that still have power are the ones that are going to get busted as soon as this story is told. So, that's another aspect we can go after. It's the dope.
Yeah, I agree, and that is who wants to stay in power. There, we did identify an airplane making all these nonstops between Venezuela and Serbia that looked like was the big dope run between Otpor and the Venezuelans and all that. Does look like a dope plane, gold in one direction, dope in the other. So there is a hot pistol here that we can follow in terms of evidence. It's got that Peter Strzok feel to it, with, hey, you got weapons? Let me show you how to grow opium. And we know the KLA was given these blackberries and in Serbia to do encrypted communications. So this could be just a long dope ring unwinding in front of our face and showing itself as a weed as foreign interference. I agree with all that, John. But I want to go back to your dad in the TDY, which is, and when you were talking about this the other night with Christopher Simpson and Blowback, you were saying, Colby, I maybe it was with Dr. Hamamoto. I can't remember when we were talking about it, but I said in the comments, Colby had to choose somebody to be the TDY guy. As great as your dad was with all the intelligence and how he moved in the circles of Washington, D.C., he had to have some kind of sponsorship at the highest levels to say, here's where you can get them. Here's where you can catch the CIA in the act. And to be specific, I mean the CIA intersection with Vietnam, black ops, special ops guys, the Green Beret type, the Nugan Hand Bank guys. To be very specific, Phoenix program was the funding mechanism. They used the Phoenix program, a special access program, to create the dope program. Richard Armitage, David Grange later on, Mueller, all these people that are currently in power. Okay, that's the inner circle. I agree with you that if we just did some publications and declassifications, we would have this. But getting back to Colby and your dad, this is where I would see a Colby who was in Vietnam, who knew where the dope dealing was going on, is giving information to Doug Valentine, because he knows that if he writes about it, it's going to be shining a light. And you mentioned you read CIA as organized crime, where they were letting him talk to 100 different CIA guys, right? He's not doing that because he said, you know what, I see this little writer coming up and I want to make him successful. He's got to have a motivation. Colby has to have a motivation. I've said for a long time he had the same motivation your dad did. He was a soldier as well. He's an intelligence officer as well. He wants America to win in Vietnam, but he doesn't want to do it at the end of a needle. He doesn't want dope coming back into the United States and being the way that it worked. So I'm out to try to prove the connection between Colby, and you talked about George Washington University. You talked about the files we went to try to find, and we found them. And I found some of those online, archives online. We got 100 leads to follow with all these different CIA agents that Doug talked to. And so that's really good leads there. But I'm convinced that it is Phoenix. It is this bad seed that was created in Phoenix. Phoenix was a horrific, evil of low intensity warfare against civilians, not against people, not against military. Okay, and that's the dope. That's where the dope comes from. Now we know that the CIA was already well down the track with the Hallowell plan and all that, but I'm saying that's where it really got massive funding. This is where Kissinger comes in with Armitage and really makes it go big time. And John, look at your dad. He's at the middle of it all. He's with Colby. He's TDY. He's in the giving the secrets to the Russians. He's trying to stop that with the nerve gas. He's in with Ruby and Oswald. I mean, my goodness, we're one heartbeat away here from all this evidence. And so I just think declassification would be a great next move. Also, I think the next thing is fire Bill Barr as incompetent today, and then name an attorney general who will actually move this thing forward. Not Sidney Powell. She blew it. She blew her chance. But I would like to see a John Ratcliffe, someone who is at the ODNI, who's seen the papers, he's seen the files, and now he can come over as a lawyer and prosecute this thing. And it wouldn't take that long.
Well, as I said the other day, I'm all for William Colby turning out to be a hero, and I hadn't, you pointed out something that I didn't see, and I think that's very perceptive of you, George, that, yeah, Colby probably wasn't just being nice to this young man in his Methodist outfit. Nice young man that needs a little help in getting his career started. Let me throw him 100 CIA agents to talk to for free. I think that's a great analysis, and I agree with you. So it's funny, this morning on our little local Facebook page, someone posted a picture of that church, the Rock Point Catholic Church there, taken 100 years ago. And it's pretty interesting, and other people put that, and isn't it a curious coincidence that would pop up today, and here you are talking about Colby. And let's put also into the scales the fact that he was murdered. I mean, it's pretty obvious that he was murdered. The sheriffs down here didn't report it as such. The records don't show it as a murder, but come on. The guy was. There's no reason why he should have drowned on that day, and I think Kay Griggs spelled it out pretty well that it's Mossad and U.S. Special Forces work together in training, and they have the frogmen all over the place, and this is where I am here. This is one of their training areas for sure. So how hard was it? Yeah, Colby flipped at the end. He helped John DeCamp with the Franklin thing, and so there you go. He got his reward. That's the way I see it. It's just my opinion. I can't state that as a fact.
Well, and John, I've spent a year and a half there too, talking and interviewing people and all the fishermen and all that looked for Colby and everything. And there was supposedly this group. I don't know if you've ever heard this story. I thought I mentioned it to you once or twice, but there was a group of 7 or 8 Vietnamese, quote unquote, fishermen that lived around Rock Point up the Wicomico that Colby that went to that church.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they were fishermen. They had a boat, and I need to dig more into this, but the story was they went to that same church that Colby went to. And now I know Colby used it as a vacation home when he came down there. I've talked to the guy who owns the house now. He's a guy, local guy there, and he would take his kayak out at night, go over, exactly what I'm talking about, to the little beach there, and then go in and pray. And the members of this little Vietnamese team were also praying at that church or going to that church. And I thought, if he has the 68,000 McDuff files and he's putting 1,000 of those over there at the church altar, and then they're walking out with their Bibles the next day, I just felt like this was an intelligence organization. And the other thing that's interesting is they disappeared the same day Colby went missing. They disappeared the same day Colby went missing.
I never knew this before. That's fascinating. I want to ask some locals about that too. That's interesting.
Yeah, because if he did bring, a lot of people, you've talked to them all who said Colby didn't have any entourage or any kind of protection or any kind of bodyguards. He just came down there, boiled his, went to Captain John's, got his oysters, and went home and ate them, or crab or whatever. So it was interesting that if there was sort of this intercept that happened out there on the water, normally he would be doing the same pattern over and over and over, not to get out any suspicion. But this one was later. This time he went out wasn't at dusk. It was at like nearing night. So I always look to that and say, was he using the guys he knew in Vietnam, because he ran covert operations in Vietnam, did he bring them back with him and have a little intelligence network? Because when he testified, I think over 13 times in 75 at the church hearings. So I don't see somebody, singing like that with the family jewels and all that. Family jewels, I think is what he called them. With the death gun, with the scorpion dart and all that, and who was sitting right next to him during all that? Bill Barr.
In the church hearings, or
yes. You go pull the.
I will
pull the clip. Pull the clip of Colby showing the dart gun, the one that had that toxin, neurotoxin.
I thought it was Helms that showed it, but we'll see.
No, it was Colby. And we'll look at the guy sitting right next to him. Who's the guy feeding information back to Bush to try to contain this Colby giving out the information? It's Bill Barr. I'll let you play it.
All right. Well, give me a second, and I'll.
If you say Colby, that's shellfish toxin gun, the ice bullet, or if you say Colby ice bullet or whatever. And the reason why Barr is sitting there, and the reason why Barr got put in there, is he was back channeling all the information Colby was giving to Bush. Bush and Cheney. Cheney was in the White House with Ford at the time. Cheney was saying, how long do we let this guy go?
Let's look at this for a second. I think I can pull it up. Let's see. Yeah, here we go.
Also, I had to find one time they wanted me to find out if there was such a thing as a poison that was undetectable, especially one that seemed to mimic a heart attack, that would kill someone, but it would appear that they had a heart attack. I did find such a thing.
Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
The poison was frozen into some sort of dart, and then it was shot at very high speed into the person. So when it reached the person, it would melt inside them, and the only thing would be like one little tiny red dot on their body, which was hard to detect. There wouldn't be a needle left or anything like that in the person.
Wait a minute, there he is again.
But also the toxin itself would not appear in the autopsy?
Yes, so that there was no way of perceiving that the target was hit.
For many years.
I said, you have to consider the possibility of some danger to not only your reputation, but to your person. I mean, people do react rather violently to some kinds of charges, or particularly if they're true, there's more apt to be a negative reaction than if they're false. If they're false charges, then they can be reacted to in a normal way, by a libel suit or whatever. But if there's truth in it, there can be a danger in that situation. We've seen that happen in other cases.
So don't make any accusations, and it looks like DeCamp is the next person in this, if I recognize him. Anyway, we saw the church panel, and I don't know if that was Bill Barr or not, frankly, but it's interesting. He certainly was involved. He graduated in '71 and went right into the CIA as a China expert. So back that far, certainly he was involved. Barr, I mean.
Yeah, you'll be shocked when you see it, because the big fear that Cheney had, the big fear the whole Bush team had with the Phoenix stuff is this going to be let out in Congress, in an open session in Congress? And Barr is sitting right there. You're going to be shocked, John, when you see it. Barr sitting right there next to Colby with the dart gun. So if you Google the words Colby and Barr and dart gun, you'll see hundreds of pictures. And why else would he be there? Why else would Bill Barr be there? Just because he's a CIA lawyer? No, he was there to back channel information to Dick Cheney. Was in the White House. It was under the transition when they were pulling the rug out from under Nixon so they could put their buddy in, which was Gerald Ford. And then who became the CIA director after he drove away, after Colby drove away? George Bush.
Yeah.
George Bush.
Well, all right. A couple of other points about the election, because we're getting toward the end of the hour here, I want to cover with you. First of all, there are two other obvious options that the president has. The first one having to do with why was this particular suit dismissed by the Supreme Court, and it's just a procedural ground that they said they didn't have standing. Well, perhaps they didn't have standing because it hadn't gone through the district court trial process. It hadn't gone up, through the normal stair steps of appellate procedure. And if they can get it through the state courts, then, or in the federal courts in the states, that then they'd have a new shot at it, because the only reason it was bounced out was because apparently they said, one state can't sue another state over their election procedures. Well, if you go into the state itself and you show that the election procedures were fraudulent, and the Supreme Court of that state doesn't throw it out, then the Supreme Court of the United States can come in and say, there is a preponderance of the evidence that there was fraud, and we as an appellate court and the supreme law of the land cannot allow that to stand, and we will reverse it on those grounds. That's one way. The other way, of course, is the legislatures, and the interesting constitutional question of, if a legislature passes a law that says that its electors must follow the popular vote of the state, does that state law have precedence over the rules that are set forth in the Constitution itself for who is going to do the voting? It says the electors of the states are to vote, but in terms of, can a state legislature bind the future? Can they say, we're not going to let our electors have any mental discretion anymore? We're just going to use them as, as like automatons. We voted for Biden, so you must vote for Biden. Is that a constitutional statute? It hadn't been decided. I think we're going to have to face that, because I do believe that the Constitution requires that the electors exert some judgment and not just be a rubber stamp for the legislature. That's a, so those are two very broad avenues that the president still has, and I'm with you. I don't know why they use these. They're almost like flashy things, like Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell. It's like it's like running a false prosecution to make it look like you're prosecuting somebody, but you're really not. If that's what's going on here, then that supports my theory that Trump is just basically pressuring everybody, full court press on everybody until he gets somebody to flip. When he gets somebody to flip, and maybe it'll be Bill Barr, maybe he thinks he can flip Bill Barr, but that goes against all the evidence that we've been recording for our 4 years together, and it's obvious that you can't expect Bill Barr to do anything except for support the program that he spent his life building, and that is the destruction of the United States through the importation of addictive narcotics.
Yeah. Well, there is this case, we talked about it 3 years ago, where you say any individual, I had 4 classes in my class action lawsuit, but any individual who's a voter is potentially a class. Anybody who voted for Donald Trump is potentially a class with standing. Anybody who gave money to Donald Trump is even a smaller class, but still a potential class. And then finally, people who are the state electors themselves. This is why I'm spending so much time in Georgia, because the person we want to put up in front of the Supreme Court, if at all possible, I want to be the person who there's been a novel written about him as the leader of Trump's secret team. Exactly what you're talking about, John, which is the civil insurrection using the military with these retired military officers. He's the guy. He's the one that had the book written about him as that person. It's fictional. So people don't know James Grimshaw. That's who it is. And I've had several meetings with him, 3 or 4 meetings now, and I'm still working on him to be that superstar. He's been on 60 Minutes before. He had a big interview with Mike Wallace back in the 70s. So he's been an actor. So he has that, John O'Loughlin type grace and so forth under the camera lights and so forth. So, I think we do need an Ollie North type of thing, chest full of medals, highest decorated guy in the history of Vietnam, that kind of guy to go up and say, Your Honor, or Your Honors, the United States has had an act of treason. There's a treasonous cabal within our government that's working with foreign intelligence agencies to steal this election. I'm all for free and fair elections. As a matter of fact, he's a Democrat. But this cannot stand. This is just as if somebody came in, if the British sailed up the Potomac and burned the White House down and left Dolly Madison's cakes, out in the rain. I would stand up. We'd be out there, John, with our muskets, right, firing on the British ships leaving. We'd be firing at them on both sides, and you have documented those heroes that did that. What's the difference? What's the difference? These people have come in from a foreign country, sailed up the Potomac, gone into our White House, sent terabytes to Pakistan, terabytes to Serbia, and burned down our form of government. It's just, the only thing is you didn't see it. You didn't see it. We laid the groundwork for this a long time ago with when you were up there at the Potomac at Fort Washington. We just have to explain that to the American people.
And I agree with you. And that invasion has been completely financed by the dope trade. That invasion has been paid for by the lives of our children, of people's, loved ones that have, because we know that these narcotics are addictive, and the British Empire has proven that for 400 years. If you can get people started with opium, you've got a cash cow. As long as that person has money, they're going to be handing it to you, as long as you've got dope to give them. So that invasion that you speak of, and it's funny, it comes to mind, George, that after Colby died, and it was maybe about 5-6 years ago now, there was an MS-13 bust at the end of Rock Point Road. So right there where Colby was, that probably very close to that church, I can't say exactly, but the whole point of what you just said could very well be that there's these little creeks and places up and down the Potomac where the dope comes in, the MS-13 picks it up and distributes it. And was that going on right down there at Rock Point before the sheriffs busted them a few years ago? I just find it to be very confirming of the theory, and probably places all over the place up and down the Potomac where they have little inlets where they can, maybe come in with a little submarine and dump stuff off that way. If the military is involved, and they are, then there's no limit to how much dope they can bring into this country.
Well, if Colby did have a secret team right there, and let's say he had the 7 or 8 fishermen that were kind of his people guarding his perimeter, and he was passing something under Cheney's nose, you have to somehow figure out a way for Cheney and Barr not to see it, right? To get these documents out. So the counter op for that would be to bring in a whole bunch of people, like 50. Like an MS-13, which is really just the original Barr Iran-Contra guys. I mean, those are the guys we've been training for 40 years, and you have to kill everybody at once. So it's not just Colby, but you have to get rid of the whole team, right? You have to wipe out the whole secret team simultaneously. That takes a lot of people. Then how are they gonna hang around? You know, how are they going to support themselves? It was that dope ring right at that same spot. Right at that same spot. Eventually, you break the dope ring. Barr puts the hammer down on them, and then they're gone off the jail or whatever. But I think this is why Barr is doing all these executions right now. Why is Barr doing all these executions in the prison system? And I'm just thinking, man, I bet you these people go back to the ops that when they were trying to do the cover-up ops. Because why all of a sudden in your last month are you going nuts with the executions? I don't see why all of a sudden now, when the cards are coming out the table about this dope ring, now all of a sudden we need to kill all these people. I don't get it.
That's a very interesting observation. I like it. It's got to end. It's got to stop. You know, I mean, maybe Oliver North will, surface and say, you know what, I'm ready for the Truth Commission. You know, I'll take the pardon and spill the beans, and because, hey, we thought we were doing the right thing. That's the defense, and the American people will buy it. They'll say, okay, you had to do this so that we didn't end up being communist, even though the threat of us turning communist was absolutely zero. But you believed it. You believed that if we didn't sell all this dope to inner cities and then, and create the Crips and the Bloods and profit off of people's lives, that the whole country would have gone communist. Well, okay, mission accomplished. Okay, the Soviet Union is dead. The chance of a communist party takeover of the United States is lower than zero. It's never, ever going to happen. So stand down. Stand down. Tell the truth. Let us reset our goals to a Kennedy orientation of being the best people we can, helping as many people as we can, and it's helping to develop in a sound and sustainable way the areas of the world that are crying out for help. People are starving all over the world. We could be fixing that. We could be taking care of these people, but unfortunately, the other aspect of what we've been talking about, and we haven't mentioned it on the show yet, but it's that eugenics state of mind that comes from the eggheads of the 19th century, the British and the people at Yale and Harvard and Princeton that still are operating as if all men are not created equal. To allow that to continue now that we know it, that it's no longer necessary to our republic, I think would be a bigger crime than President Trump considering actually pulling a military action. Because when else are we going to stop it? How else are we going to ever restore the future for our children and grandchildren, George?
I think you nailed it on the pardon for Ollie North. I think Ollie North already did get a pardon, if I'm not mistaken, for Iran-Contra from George Bush, I think. But you're right. The one guy who knows where all the bones are buried in this drug trade and how it got really its legs with Iran-Contra and this current enterprise that we have. This is why I always follow the enterprise, and I always follow the enterprise network. What do they use to communicate? Ollie North had the KL-43, and he said, we need something smaller that we can hold in our hand that looks like a phone. I don't want to carry a sewing machine around in covert operations. It's a telltale. I want something small with a keyboard. And what did we get about 8 years later? We got the BlackBerry. So I do think if we concentrate on the enterprise, concentrate on the enterprise network as our information base, and look at people inside the enterprise, we're going to find the answer. It could also be one of the 300 Russians that were kind of co-opted into this network as well, because this is the group that took down the Soviet Union. So it is that group. And I like your thinking, John. Ollie North, come clean.
Yeah, it's a neat idea, Ollie. A neat idea. We've spent our hour, George. It's always such a pleasure. There's so many other things on the tip of my tongue I want to talk to you about, as always. Let me address Charles Held for a moment. He's a great follower and researcher himself, and he says, talk about NSAM 57. NSAM 57, and let me just address that for the last minute we have here. If you read The Secret Team by Fletcher Prouty, then you get the entire picture. NSAM 57 was the vehicle for bringing the special ops into the Pentagon away from the CIA. That was the vehicle that Kennedy designed to do that. And it's true what people are saying, that it was never actually implemented because Kennedy didn't live long enough to make it be implemented. But he did create SACSA. And SACSA was the hope of the Kennedy administration to effect NSAM 57. Now, we know that certain people, Maxwell Taylor, kind of messed it up, didn't let Kennedy's dream happen. And unfortunately, that is the character of some of the folks that are still involved in our government right now, is that they are still thinking, hey, these are gooks, these are geek, these are lower humans. These and they would be racist against black people too. That would be like, we can sell dope to them in order to improve humanity generally, because the dope will weed them out, and there'll only be us left. That's this horrible British Anglo-Saxon theory that's been running special ops for the British Empire since 1810, 1820, and now, as I think a lot of people are realizing, it's the British, it's the PP dossier, British, all this stuff, British. We have to stand up to them, George.
Well, I just in the last comment here on NSAM 57, I have my book, Let's Call Him McDuff, covers a lot of the foundations of this stuff. But I've also on my Patreon have started rewriting all these things. I've not rewriting, putting out the second edition of all this stuff, and that's where I cover this other stuff. And so for people who are on my Patreon, you probably already know that I put out a lot of new documentation since I wrote the book in May. So that still is a good way to catch up if you don't know who McDuff is, and to get into this stuff right where we're talking about now, the kind of hey, Trump could play this card. He has precedent. He could play the NSAM 57 card, call us joint chiefs, call a special prosecutor, even call a military tribunal if they had the smoking gun for foreign interference. This is a threat this is a real threat to our national security, right? So Trump is the commander in chief. He could do this. He could. We published the evidence to show the communication to Strzok through the Columbus, Ohio DoD network to Fruman and Parnas, who are go-betweens for Kolomoisky. We published the IP addresses for all these places. So it is possible Trump could pull the trigger on a tribunal. That's why I'm talking to special forces guys in Vietnam left and right every minute I get down here. A lot of them retire down here for some reason. I guess it reminds you of Vietnam, the marshes. this is a valid play. The NSAM 57 card is a valid play. And this is the original idea that your dad was involved in. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. NSAM 57 is still there. And although President Kennedy didn't live long enough to implement it, my father didn't live long enough to implement it, maybe now's our time. Now's our time for NSAM 57 to come in and stop all of this CIA dark weapons, dark money, dark trafficking. I mean, the future is very dark if we let the CIA keep running it. Thank God for patriots that are rising up to talk about it. I'm not talking about rising up like a revolution. I'm talking about just stand up. You know, get up, stand up, as the song says. Don't give up your rights. That's my last word for today.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure spending Saturday morning with you, and I'll see you again Thursday night with Dr. Hamamoto at 8.
Lovely. All right. Everybody have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you.